Imagine standing in the mud of a shattered trench, looking up at a sky that is completely devoid of hope. You are surrounded by the chaos of war, the distant thud of artillery, and the frantic shouting of your fellow soldiers. But suddenly, all of that ambient noise is completely drowned out by a sound that freezes the blood in your veins and paralyzes your nervous system. It is not the deep, rhythmic, heavy drone of a standard bomber engine. It is a high-pitched mechanical scream. It sounds as if the sky itself is being physically ripped open. It is a demonic wail that grows louder, sharper, and infinitely more terrifying with every passing fraction of a second. The sound taps into a primal, deeply buried human fear. You cannot run, you cannot hide, because by the time your brain registers exactly what that sound is and from what direction it is coming, a 500-kilogram high-explosive bomb is already falling directly toward your head. It is September 1939. The world is being violently introduced to a new, apocalyptic style of warfare called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. And the absolute spearhead of this unstoppable military doctrine is a machine designed specifically to shatter the human mind long before it shatters the human body. This is the Junkers Ju-87, universally known and universally feared as the Stuka. It was the most accurate, devastating dive bomber of the early Second World War. It was a bird of prey forged from angular metal, rivets, and pure psychological terror. And the true story of how it conquered the continent of Europe, only to be completely slaughtered when it finally met its match in the skies over England, is one of the most fascinating, terrifying chapters in the entire history of aviation engineering. To truly understand why the Stuka was built, and why the German military command felt it was an absolute necessity, you have to look back at the glaring failures of aerial warfare during the First World War and the years immediately following it. Traditional level bombers, planes that flew in straight lines at high altitudes and dropped their bombs in massive, uncoordinated clusters, were notoriously inaccurate. If a military commander wanted to destroy a specific high-value target, like a narrow concrete bridge, a heavily armored train, or a fortified underground bunker, sending a high-altitude bomber was practically useless. The bombs would scatter across acres of empty land, guided entirely by the unpredictable whims of wind and gravity. The emerging German military doctrine of Blitzkrieg relied entirely on extreme speed, rapid armored advances, and pinpoint accuracy. They needed a weapon that could act as flying artillery. They needed a machine that could keep pace with their fast-moving panzer divisions, fly over enemy lines, and instantly obliterate any hard resistance on the ground with sniper-like precision. The concept of dive bombing offered the perfect mathematical solution. Instead of dropping bombs from 10,000 feet in level flight, the pilot would point the nose of the aircraft directly down at the earth, using the entire airplane as an aiming reticle, and release the bomb just seconds before crashing into the ground. By following the bomb down, the variables of wind resistance and forward momentum were practically erased. But the German military elite were highly skeptical. Heavy bomber generals believed that dive bombers were a novelty, a dangerous stunt that would get pilots killed. It took a legendary First World War fighter ace named Ernst Udet to force the concept into reality. Udet had traveled to the United States in the early 1930s and witnessed American pilots flying Curtiss Hawk biplanes in steep, terrifying dives during air shows. He was absolutely mesmerized. Udet managed to purchase 2 of these American dive bombers, brought them back to Germany, and personally demonstrated their terrifying accuracy to the German high command. He proved that a single dive bomber could do the exact same amount of damage to a pinpoint target as an entire squadron of heavy-level bombers. When the engineers at the Junkers Aircraft Company were tasked with designing the ultimate dive bomber, they did not create a beautiful machine. Unlike the sleek, silver, highly aerodynamic fighter planes of the era, the Ju-87 Stuka was undeniably, aggressively ugly. It looked predatory, brutal, and entirely utilitarian. It had massive, inverted gull wings that cranked violently downward from the fuselage like a soaring vulture before angling back up. This strange wing design was not for aesthetics. It was engineered to keep the landing gear struts as short and strong as possible while providing enough ground clearance for the massive, sweeping wooden propeller. The Stuka possessed fixed landing gear encased in large aerodynamic spats that looked like the heavy, lethal talons of a hawk. It was not built for speed. It was not built for dogfighting. The Stuka was built like a flying tank, over-engineered with heavy internal bracing designed specifically to withstand the catastrophic, airframe-shattering aerodynamic stresses of pulling out of a near-vertical 400-mile-per-hour dive. But the true genius and the absolute unadulterated terror of the Stuka was what happened inside the cockpit during that dive. Let us walk through the exact, highly technical sequence of a Stuka attack, because it is a masterpiece of extreme engineering and human endurance. The pilot is flying at 10,000 feet, enclosed in a heavily framed glass canopy. He spots his target, a convoy of enemy supply trucks moving slowly down a narrow dirt road. First, he flips a heavy mechanical switch to engage the dive brakes. These are massive slatted flaps located under the wings that pivot perpendicularly into the airflow. They act as massive aerodynamic parachutes, instantly slowing the aircraft down and preventing it from accelerating past its structural limits and literally ripping its own wings off in the descent. Next, the pilot rolls the aircraft entirely upside down. This completely inverts his horizon, allowing him to see the target perfectly through a specialized glass window cut right into the floor of the cockpit. Once the target is acquired, he pulls back heavily on the control stick, plunging the nose of the aircraft down toward the earth in a terrifying, screaming 90-degree vertical dive. The exact moment the plane enters this fatal plunge, the most infamous psychological weapon of the entire Second World War activates. Mounted on the front of the landing gear struts, directly in the violent airstream, were small, propeller-driven sirens known officially as the Jericho Trumpet or the Jericho Trumpets. As the wind rushed through the blades of these small sirens at over 300 miles per hour, they generated that legendary, ear-splitting scream. The German High Command specifically engineered and installed these sirens not to make the aircraft fly better, but to paralyze the enemy infantry with pure auditory terror. It was a weapon designed to break the will to fight before the bombs even detonated. Inside the cockpit, the world becomes a chaotic blur of extreme velocity and screaming metal. The target in the Rivi-illuminated gun sight grows violently larger with every heartbeat. The altimeter dial is spinning so fast it is practically a white blur. But human biology has a strict, unforgiving limit. When a pilot pulls out of a vertical dive at 350 miles per hour, the sudden, extreme change in trajectory generates up to 6 Gs of centrifugal force. The blood is violently drained from the pilot's brain, pooling heavily in his legs and lower abdomen. His vision narrows, then goes completely black, and he loses consciousness. The German aviation engineers knew this. They knew their pilots would pass out at the exact critical moment they needed to pull up to avoid crashing into the earth at terminal velocity. To solve this fatal biological flaw, they invented an absolutely ingenious automatic pull-up system. Before initiating the dive, the pilot would set his desired release altitude on a contact altimeter. During the plunge, he would press a button on his control stick to arm the bomb. The moment the altimeter hit the preset altitude, the bomb detached from a specialized, swinging mechanical crutch, a heavy metal arm designed to swing the explosive completely clear of the spinning propeller blades. The instant the bomb was released, the Stuka's autopilot would automatically seize control of the elevator trim tabs and violently pull the aircraft out of the dive. For a terrifying, heart-stopping span of 3 to 5 seconds, the aircraft is completely flying itself, screaming just a few hundred feet above the treetops, while the pilot is completely blacked out, slumped forward lifelessly in his leather harness. As the extreme G-forces slowly stabilize, the blood rushes back to the pilot's brain, his vision clears, he takes manual control of the stick, and he flies away at low altitude while the target behind him is instantly vaporized in a massive eruption of fire and earth. During the early invasions of Poland, Norway, the Netherlands, and France, this system was absolutely unstoppable. The Stuka was a weapon of unparalleled, terrifying precision. While the heavy Allied bombers were missing their targets by hundreds of yards, a highly trained Stuka pilot could drop a 500-kilogram bomb within a 30-foot circle. They shattered the French defensive lines, blew heavily armored concrete bunkers into dust, sank entire fleets of ships attempting to evacuate in the English Channel, and broke the morale of millions. The French and British soldiers on the ground became so deeply, psychologically traumatized by the sound of the Jericho trumpets that men would physically break down, throw their weapons away, and weep the moment they heard the sirens start to wail in the distance. The Stuka became the undisputed, terrifying symbol of German invincibility. It was the apex predator of the European skies, casting a shadow of absolute doom wherever it flew. But apex predators only survive when they are not being actively hunted. And in the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe flew their massive fleets of Stukas across the English Channel to participate in the Battle of Britain, fully expecting to crush the Royal Air Force. Instead, they ran straight into an impenetrable wall of British steel and brilliant defensive strategy. The brutal, uncompromising reality of the Ju-87 was that it was a hyper-specialized machine. It was designed to do exactly one thing perfectly: dive and drop bombs. To achieve this incredible precision, the engineers had sacrificed absolutely everything else. The aircraft was incredibly heavy. It was dangerously slow, maxing out at roughly 240 miles per hour on a good day. Its defensive armament was pathetically weak, consisting of just 2 forward-firing machine guns and a single low-caliber machine gun facing backwards, operated by the radio operator. Over the skies of Poland and France, these glaring weaknesses did not matter because the German Luftwaffe had achieved total air superiority. But over the green fields of England, waiting for them, were the Royal Air Force's Supermarine Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes. These were sleek, brilliant, highly maneuverable fighter planes, capable of speeds exceeding 360 miles per hour, armed with 8 heavy machine guns each. When the slow, lumbering formations of Stukas crossed the English coastline, they were no longer the terrifying hunters of the Blitzkrieg. They instantly became the prey. The British fighter pilots, guided by a highly advanced and secretive radar network that saw the Germans coming before they even crossed the channel, realized that the Stuka was practically defenseless. If they attacked the dive bombers as they were pulling out of their steep dives, when they were moving at their absolute slowest, struggling to regain altitude, and the German pilots were physically recovering from the paralyzing G-force blackout, it was a total massacre. The Spitfires tore into the Stuka formations like wolves into a flock of sheep, shredding their heavy gull wings, blowing their engines to pieces, and executing the pilots before they could even level out. The screaming sirens that had once terrified entire armies now served a completely different purpose. They simply signaled to the British fighters exactly where their targets were. On August 18, 1940, a day forever known in aviation history as the hardest day, the Stuka fleet suffered such catastrophic, unspeakable losses that the German High Command was completely shocked. Entire squadrons were wiped out in a matter of hours. The losses were so unsustainable that Hermann Göring was forced to completely withdraw the Ju-87 from the Battle of Britain. The invincible, terrifying symbol of the Blitzkrieg had been utterly humiliated, shot out of the sky by faster, superior engineering and fearless defensive pilots. But the story of the Stuka did not end over the English Channel. As the war raged on, the aircraft was forced to evolve to survive the changing battlefield. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the vast, frozen expanses of the Soviet Union, the Luftwaffe realized they needed a weapon capable of stopping the massive waves of heavily armored Soviet T-34 tanks. The Standard bombs were no longer effective against moving armor. So, the engineers ripped the Jericho sirens off the landing gear to reduce drag, stripped away the dive brakes, and bolted 2 massive 37mm Flak 18 anti-tank cannons directly underneath the Stuka's heavy wings. This new variant, known as the Ju-87G, was nicknamed the Kanonenvogel, or the Cannon Bird. Firing armor-piercing tungsten core ammunition, these massive cannons could punch directly through the thinner top armor of the Soviet tanks. It was in this incredibly dangerous, low-level tank-busting role that the most famous and highly decorated Stuka pilot of the war, Hans-Ulrich Rudel, achieved legendary status. Rudel was a fanatic of aerial combat, flying the Cannon Bird through extreme anti-aircraft fire, often just feet above the Russian steppes. Rudel is credited with the verified destruction of over 500 Soviet tanks, essentially wiping out 5 entire armored corps by himself. He was shot down over 30 times. He lost his right leg to anti-aircraft fire, and yet, completely defying medical logic and military regulations, he continued to fly combat missions with a prosthetic leg until the very last day of the war. Rudel's sheer determination proved that while the Stuka was obsolete as a traditional dive bomber, in the hands of an absolute master, it was still an instrument of unparalleled destruction. The Ju-87 Stuka stands today as one of the most polarizing and terrifying machines in all of military history. It was a dark masterpiece of aerodynamic engineering, a machine that pushed the limits of human biology to the absolute breaking point and introduced the concept of psychological warfare on a scale that the world had never before seen. It brought entire nations to their knees with a single screaming mechanical wail. But it also serves as a permanent, brutal reminder of the unforgiving reality of warfare. Specialization is an incredibly dangerous game to play. The moment the Stuka lost its protective fighter shield, the moment it faced an enemy that possessed the speed and the firepower to fight back in the sky, the legendary Siren of Death was instantly, violently silenced. It was the ultimate weapon of the Blitzkrieg, born in terror, defined by destruction, and ultimately consumed by the very war it helped to start.